it's Denis Lazavik. It's always d4. And there we go. Denis the d-pawn makes its first move, 2 squares forward, and Magnus replies in kind. Do you think we will see a repetition from Magnus, that a6, h6 creepy crawly variation? Ooh.
Oh, we have a London with us.
Okay, no Queen's Gambit declined this time. It's actually Denis who switches things up first. And Denis had this position yesterday. He's actually been playing the London system in recent times, not his usual Catalan. So Magnus, he's the master of the London. He loves playing in London and he loves playing the London system. He's one of a kind. But okay, have you seen this before, Tanya? Magnus sacrificing a pawn.
And the players are blitzing out, so I think they've seen this before because they're making their decisions really quickly, David. It's not familiar for me at all. So I'm going to throw the ball to you. What do you know about this opening and this position that we've got?
Dang, I was trying to dodge the question myself. I know it's playable. I've actually seen this position before, but I've never studied it myself. I've seen it in a few top-level games where black has good compensation due to the fact that this white king is actually stranded in the center for a long, long time. But yeah, ultimately, I do believe in white's chances if the white king ever gets castled, even at the cost of giving the pawn back. And right now, let's remind everyone, Denis is the one with the material advantage. So if he's going to suffer for something. And look at Magnus on the camera, Tanya. What's that? Has he forgotten his opening theory again?
It's so many things. I think it could be that, but it's also the exhaustion of the day. I think one can't underestimate how much chess Magnus has played today and how difficult this match has also been so far. David, a temporary extra pawn for Denis, but there's a pin on d2. The development isn't over just yet, so you need to be a little careful with white, play a little precisely. But it feels as if Denis is super well prepared. He's barely used any time on the clock. It's Magnus who goes into the first big thing in the position. I would say out of the first few moves, a gutsy decision against Magnus Carlsen to trade queens, but it's Denis Lazavik who's better prepared.
Yeah, it's really brave. I mean, from my limited knowledge of this type of opening, as Magnus reacts again, from my limited knowledge, black is totally fine. It's got a good reputation for black. But of course, you need to be accurate if you sacrifice a pawn. Magnus kind of winces. I'm slightly surprised at that. It looks like his last move is healthy, Tanya. He's got a clear plan to who needs to castle when the queens are off. He's going to play rook c8. He's going to try and connect his rooks, bring the knight out to c6. Suddenly it's Denis who's looking off to the side, looking off to his left, which normally means a player's recalling something they've studied before. Tanya, big opening battle. Was this something we were expecting?
We were expecting something offbeat by Denis, something that asks early questions to Magnus, and I think he's managed to achieve just that. What you really want with white is to develop that f1 bishop. For me, the most natural looking move in this position would be e3. I want to start capturing that pawn. I want to take out my pieces. I want to unpin myself with a potential castle or a king to e2. But David, the idea of rook c8 seems to come in so quick, and then you're calculating all these lines with the c pawn moving forward. Things I think are about to get messy really soon in this one.
Yeah, it's feels like it's been a game of double bluff. Magnus was like, okay, you play the London system if you want. I'm going to play this really direct, really ambitious variation against it, offering up a pawn. If you take it, you better know your stuff. Denis was like, okay, I'll take the pawn. Do you know how to react? And Magnus does. Look at that. The blue arrow appears. Your c3 move on the cards, Tanya. That was a really critical moment. And wow, pawn trade quicker than you can call it. But Magnus, is he trapping this white rook? It's running out of squares.
I'm trying to find the right square for that rook. The two bishops are dominating a lot of it. And look at that. That's not a move that Magnus probably had on his radar. Look at him on the camera. But it perhaps was the only move in the position, David, to not lose material.
Yeah, let's just do a quick action replay. That was so fast, blink and you miss it. I want to show a few cool tactics that were actually hidden beneath the surface there. And it all started after white's a3 move, hitting the black bishop. And here, only one move to keep the balance. Black had to play pawn to c3, which is actually a piece sacrifice in some lines. If white takes the black bishop, black's not going to take this knight check. White would be 2 pawns up there. Instead, he was going to take this pawn and remain a whole piece down. The white rook, though, lacking squares. If it moves to safety, for example, now rook to c8. And watch out, the rook's coming in. If the bishop moves, whoops, rook to c1, and black's b-pawn will soon make a new queen once the white knight is removed as a defender. So Magnus actually sacked a piece. Denis said, no thanks, I'm going to trade. And in this position, I was saying, oh, maybe the rook on c1 is trapped after bishop to b2. But as you mentioned, Tanya, bishop d6 check, the only move, or maybe the best move to keep the balance, and luring the black king forward. Another check, a fork, and once the black king retreats, this is the position. The dust has settled. I don't know who's better, but I think we've both been proved that the players, they knew their theory, Tanya.
Well, and we do know that white has still that extra pawn. So the pawn remains alive, but in compensation, white is behind in development, still needs a few moves to consolidate. Meanwhile, Magnus isn't giving those moves away. He continues to put pressure, now capturing the c file, offering a trade where the other rook will join the party and end up on the c2 square. David, even though Denis is the one with extra pawn, it feels like Magnus has enough initiative. With the rooks capturing the open line, a potential penetration on the second rank, I'm liking black's position here.
Yeah, the more I look at it, the more I think it's really difficult for white here, especially if he's out of opening prep now, Denis, to navigate your way through this. Who cares if you're a pawn down? Magnus really never cares if he's a pawn down. Yes, it's a very strong pawn, but it's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's more about piece activity, and you might be a pawn down with black, but you're a rook up almost. This white rook in the corner, snoring loudly, and I don't even see how to continue. I've got to say, Tanya, how does Denis keep fighting? Does he trade, and then put a knight on d3 and hope there's no checkmate? White king is not enjoying life.
That would be a very brave way to play on without any development on the king's side. But David, the white might need to start getting brave here because, like you said, it's hard to come up with moves that stabilize white's position. So much easier for Magnus to play. And that is so key in these kind of time formats. Who has the position where the moves flow in a more natural way? And one can just tell that with the black pieces, you're just looking at an easy play here. You're looking at your pieces going up the board. The rook coming forward, the knight from d7 can go to b6, the knight from f6 can eventually either land on e4 with the trade, or maybe even in certain positions on that d5 square. Meanwhile, no time for Denis to improve the position of his pieces, and no time on the clock as well. He's under 6 minutes now.
Yeah, really difficult for Denis Lazavik. Maybe just while he thinks just to put on the board what might be going through his mind. Maybe it will be a rook trade. Maybe he'll trade off this bishop, but to show the danger, there's already a deadly rook check landing on c1, and my instinct was to put a knight on d3, slowly but surely try to evict the black knight with the move f3 next so the white king can run. But I realized there's already ideas like rook to b8 at the very minimum coming in, and checkmate on Magnus's mind. Again, white is just one move too slow all the time, Tanya. Let's catch up though. There have been a few moves. He played knight to c4, blocking, but self-pinning. Ugh, ugly. And now he's played the move f3. What do you make of this, Denis? Is he a menace or is he crumbling in this position?
He's always a menace, but it's tough to be one against Magnus. And I just feel you never trade queens against Magnus. That is the new rule of chess. Just don't get into any endgames against the guy. And that pin does look like something that you have to answer against, especially because you can reinforce the attack on that c4 knight. The bishop, which is attacked right now on e4, David, can find itself on d5, asking some questions, and it might be time to push the e-pawn. And I think that's Denis's idea. e4 comes in with the tempo. It feels like Magnus, with how quickly he's playing, he knows exactly what he's doing. Bishop takes bishop, one step away from connecting the two rooks. What does Magnus have in mind after that?
Yeah, good question. I wonder whether he's just going to go after the newly weakened d4 pawn. So, for example, you're advocating bishop takes c4. I agree. Normally, you want to take with a knight before a bishop, but here it's more important to connect the rooks. So bishop takes, but then rook to d8, maybe regaining the pawn. Maybe?
That's a really nice idea. And I also want to point out that after knight takes bishop, I think you're just lost because black can simply double up on the c line. And I don't see a way for white to be on time to actually defend against that pin, David.
Yeah, let's just show this. Here you're going for rook c, although rook c7 maybe I'd take. Maybe I'm surviving.
That's a nice tactic. Super nice stuff.
Giving up. Oh, it doesn't work. Giving up. Oh, it's because of rook takes
maybe
f1
rook takes
at the end.
f1.
Yeah, selling the rook for a very high price, and black emerges with extra pieces. But if not knight takes b6, then what is it? Why is white not just losing, as you mentioned? What's Denis thinking about?
Uh, Big question, because rook c8 is a massive threat. By the way, he is still, he does go with the bishop. He does pick it up, so he did spot the problem with knight takes bishop. Apparently, it wasn't rook c7, but David, bishop takes knight on the board. I think it's also a human approach. You don't want to keep pinning yourself on the c file. You want to improve the position of your king, connect the two rooks. Another big question is, where is Magnus Carlsen's compensation? Did you see that? He's surprised.
He is surprised, Magnus, right now. And yeah, my original suggestion of rook to d8, maybe white just ignores it. Maybe white just gives the pawn back, moves his king forward, and white has a small advantage. I did realize, Tanya, rook c6, given a miss, maybe rook takes c4 was an idea, followed by rook to c8. But okay, now king e2. He's going to be tied up in knots, Denis Lazavik, but he's still a pawn up. Rook to c8 is a pin. What do you think's coming next? Magnus doesn't look too happy.
And I'm trying to understand that. Why is that the case? Because you've got this eternal pin, or at least what seems like an eternal pin along the c file. The bishop can't move. And Magnus plays e5. Is it d5 now? Because I don't believe you can take the e5 pawn. It's free, but it comes actually with a big price. That knight can reroute itself to d7 and land on a very key square on either e5 or give a check to a key defender of the c4 square via c5.
Yeah, taking this, kind of allowing your king to get checked in all sorts of directions as well. It looks terrifying. So Denis Lazavik, he won't know that this was actually a mistake from Magnus Carlsen. I'm not sure why it's a mistake, Tanya. Like you said, d5 closes the position. So white's actually a pawn up, but black's knights favor the locked up center there. Black's knight, I guess, can come around via e8, d6. That wasn't the move, apparently. But I wonder what was. That's really, really confusing, I think, for both players.
And David, I wanted to point this out. I think for white, the idea is simply to double up on the c file, and that rook on c2 is guarded by the king. And once that h1 rook lands on c1, and you unpin yourself. So Magnus just has one move to try to put pressure, but it's not clear how he's doing it. And once the pin is unraveled, white can start playing for more.
Definitely. Denis is playing for more. He's got 3.5 minutes. That's enough time if you remain a pawn up. I don't see it. Tanya, I think, Magnus doesn't see it. Did you see that on the camera? Just reacting. He's like, oh, I'm just a pawn down. What's going on? Knight d7? That looks like a bit of an odd square. Superfluous knights, as they say, when the knights are treading in each other's path. They both want to use the same square. I thought the knight was actually going back to the more natural outpost on d6. Magnus in trouble.
That felt like the maneuver. I agree with you. Magnus Carlsen is in trouble in this endgame. If he was playing with the white pieces, we would say this is over. You're not making a comeback in this game. You're down a pawn. There's no attack on the c file. There's no pin to rely on, and he doesn't even go rook to c1. He now falls back with the bishop, offering a rook trade. Knight is going to jump in with a check, though. So there is a little bit of activity for black. Was bishop b3 an inaccuracy there?
Perhaps maybe he just needed to stay calm, just activate that lazy rook in the corner on h1. What do you think is going through his mind right now, Denis Lazavik? First of all, he's got to react to the check, but do you think he's getting excited, Tanya? He must know he's got an advantage here.
Magnus Carlsen lives rent-free in his opponent's head. Denis Lazavik has to make sure he doesn't let Magnus get into his head. He needs to only think about his next move, David. He just needs to focus on that. Not think about the result, not think about the math situation, but just try to keep his chances alive. The moment he goes into the psychological battle with Magnus, that's bad news for Denis. So stay focused. Rook c2 is a threat. Rook c3 is a threat. How do you counter these two big options? And knight e6, quite a star move by Magnus.
Really clever. Magnus knows now he'll either get his rook in, maybe to capture the bishop on c2, or he'll establish a monster knight in the center of the board on a beautiful outpost on d4. So yeah, Denis facing a dilemma here. Bishop to d3 you could move, but allowing the black knight in feels a bit scary long term. Or you could remove the risk, but also maybe reduce your own winning chances if the black rook gets in. Like you say, Tanya, rook check as well coming to c3 soon to pick up the a3 pawn. So really difficult decisions, at least for Denis Lazavik. Even if objectively he has an advantage, it's far from easy to convert.
Super tough, and especially when you're touching the 1 minute mark right now. And the thing is, I don't really see a universe where he allows Magnus to post that knight on d4. That is not a knight anymore. That's an absolute stallion on the board, controlling so many squares, and the black rook still looking at penetrating along the c file. But if you trade on e6, I don't believe the a3 pawn will stay alive after the minor pieces are traded off. D takes e6, rook takes c2. The rook is not only threatening the c3 square, but also a slide over to the a2 square, picking up that a3 pawn. David, the more I look at this, the more I think that Denis a few moves ago should have included that final piece, that rook on h1 into the game. And I think that was his big opportunity.
Yeah, and there we go. Magnus blitzing out the moves now. He actually takes that pawn first. Tanya, really clever, really instructive there. This f7 pawn is going nowhere, so Magnus will restore the material balance. There we go. It's 4 pawns against 4 pawns. Only white should be able to win because black's e-pawn is a weakness, but surely not enough. And more importantly, the white knight cannot get in. It can never step forward without being traded off with a dead drawn rook endgame. Tanya, predictions now. Do you think Magnus is safe enough? Do you think he's going to get the draw that he requires?
I think so, David. I think the answer to that is yes. Now that there's a material balance, the a pawn about to start rolling down the board, but watch out for a rook c6 check. It's important to keep that knight on b6 defended for just now, so you can't rush with it. But the simple fact is that black has a passer, while white still has to get work done to get g3, f4 in. If you're doing that, and he does it, he's going for the idea, trying to create a passer of his own, get f4 in time. If you can create a central passer, then I think we still have a game. But to answer your question, Magnus is holding this, especially with Denis under 3 seconds. What's going on with the clock? The clock's losing its mind as well.
The clock scaring us there. I think he did have enough time on his clock. He's now at 16 seconds. Making a decision though. Pawn to f4. He's going for it. I mean, I like to ask myself, what would Magnus do in an endgame? And I think Magnus might have started by pushing the h-pawn first. But this one is very direct. Big threat now to just simply capture on e5 and in some universe to capture on g7 as well. So asking questions, Denis Lazavik. I'm not going to rule him out yet, but 16 seconds against 5 minutes. I mean, you inadvertently mentioned the clock, Tanya, but that might be the key. How does Denis keep taking risks with no time? And Magnus has got so much time to calculate. Surely Magnus doesn't blunder with 5 minutes on his clock.
But it's still game on. We were talking about creating passes, and Denis has managed to do that in 2 moves. And again, the a-pawn needs to defend the b6 knight. So you're not in time getting a5. The knight from b6 can't jump to c4, the ideal square, because the rook on c7 guards against any threats of the pin along the second rank. David, it's a game for all 3 results, but the clock is the scary part for Denis. Completely agree on that. Giving a check, I think he's going to start pushing the pawns next.
Yep. Actually, the professional thing to do would be to check a couple of times and repeat, gain a few seconds on the clock, but Denis goes first, f5. Oh, but he's let the Black Knight get back in the game, back alive. If the Black Knight ever lands on an outpost, Black should be safe, but still some tricks. Magnus has to walk into a pin himself. Oh, this one is, yeah, still so tense. Denis is not out of it. He's been doing everything right apart from play quickly on the clock. Ooh, knight c4 though, a bit of a threat. Rook g8 coming. He's still creating threats, Tanya.
This is getting tricky, and a nice square for Black's knight. They're controlling that c4 check, so that means we've got a trade. If Black does pick up that knight on c4, do you even have time to pick up the pawn on h2 next?
You do, and rook endgames, they don't grant the most winning chances. It looks like Magnus temporarily a pawn up, but will lose his a7 pawn. It's just about whether he can force the draw now. I'm not sure how exactly. White still threatens ideas of rook a6 check. The e-pawn looks quite scary. Magnus needs to trade off another set of pawns. Somehow he needs to get this f5 pawn gone, but not easy to achieve. Central pawns are always the best pawns in rook endgames, Tanya. Still some chances.
And one of the big chances, a rook a6 check, and if the king would have moved to the center of the board, there are mating patterns that actually exist in that position. So Black's king has to fall back. Denis not getting greedy. That pawn on a7 isn't going anywhere. He's eyeing that e5 square for the king, trying to set up a kill zone on Magnus's king in the back rank.
Yeah, this is like watching Magnus Carlsen himself, the way Denis is playing this endgame, but it should still be a draw. Note how Magnus went with the rook to the side. He's going to check the white king from the side, or at least keep the white king honest. I think even without the h6 pawn, this position is a draw, but Magnus, he's found the drawing motif. Denis is going to try and go in with his king, but it's too slow. It doesn't work. Rook b4 again. should just hold the white king in its place. There we go from Magnus. Tanya, queens are off. Magnus just knows where the pieces belong. It's the same old story.
Just amazing stuff. And we're saying that it's an easy hold for black only because Magnus is playing black. It's still such a complex endgame. You allow white's king with the activity. And now the e-pawn is about to move forward. Is rook f6 the way to go? Because, David, I would be terrified of allowing e5 on the board.
Rook f6, e5 can still be played, Tanya. Wait, e5? No, you can't take the pawn. King e6. What?
Magnus Carlsen, did he? Oh, there's still
wait.
e6 there.
Oh my god. But why did the bar go crazy? Oh my god. Denis was winning for one move. I thought king e6 was checkmate as well, but both players missed it. Denis has no time. We will show that later to everyone, I promise, but now it's a dead drawn endgame. Now it's over.
What happened there? And I think it wasn't just Denis who missed it. Magnus missed it as well. And that's it. The king comes to f8. It's a king versus king. Magnus holds a tough endgame. Ends in a draw. What a fight by Denis Lazavik. He lost only one game, the first game. That could have ended in a draw. And Magnus doesn't look happy with the way the game has gone. He doesn't look happy with the way the match has gone. But he knows he still managed to get the job done. David, it wasn't easy for him.